What is going on, YouTube? Got another custom for you today. Today I will be working on this 1970 Chevy Chevelle. This casting is a mainline from 2017 and was part of the Nightburnerz segment series. This car came with 3 different paint jobs in 2017. There was an orange one, a Target exclusive red and white one, and this blue one. I think this is a pretty cool casting. Comes with a lot of extra flair with the rear spoiler, the front splitter, the fender flares, the ground effects, and it's got a pretty low stance. To me, it kind of looks like a car that's set up to run in the Trans Am races. I think I have a pretty cool idea for this car that, if it all works out, should be looking pretty sweet when everything's all said and done. This car is going to be built for the track, so I'm going to focus on making it as fast as possible, adding some weight, and working on the tires. With the car all taken apart, it is time to get that blue paint off there. As usual, I use the citrus strip stripping gel and apply that all over the car and let that sit for a little while to get all that paint off there. For some reason, it took quite a while for the citrus strip to get that paint off this car. I failed to sand it before putting that on there, so maybe that played a part. But it took 2 coats and waiting probably an hour before it all finally came off. Eventually it started looking like this, so that was a good time to get all this paint off there. I just go over it with a brush and knock off as much as I possibly can. And then once I have it mostly off of there, it's time to give it a good wash, go over it with the steel wool, and make sure all the paint is off. It has some pretty dramatic body lines on it, and not all the paint came out of the seams, as you can see there on the hood. So I grabbed a pick and started going through the seams to remove all that paint. I found a pick set at Harbor Freight for, I think it was like $1, and it had 4 or 5 different picks in it. For some reason I picked this one that didn't do a really good job, and off camera I changed to a different pick that actually got into the seams and got that paint out of there. This can be a pretty tedious process, but I think it's an important one, and it's very important to get all the paint out of those seams. One issue I found with this casting, especially if I want it to go down the track and be fast, is there's not a whole lot of clearance between the tires and the fenders. As you can see here on this one, there is almost 0 clearance between the fenders and the tire. So to go fast, we can't have those tires rubbing up against the fenders. That's not going to allow the wheels to roll correctly, and you're going to have a pretty slow car. So to fix that and ensure that the tires will roll freely and not get hung up on the fenders, I'm going to attempt to remove as much material from the fenders as I can without affecting the overall appearance of the car. I used a couple different files to file away the inside of the fenders, and then I switched over to a circular grinding stone on my Dremel and smoothed out the inside of the fender wells. As you can see here, the grinding stone worked really well. After using the grinding stone, I went over it with some sandpaper and smoothed out the inside of those fenders the best I could. I'm going to be using some decals on this casting, but I'm a little bit worried about the decals that are going to be going on the hood. This hood has a couple different levels to it and a really large hood scoop, and I'm not quite sure how the decals are going to form to that. So before I cut the decals and put them on there, I want to make a template, and I just make that template by using some tape and going over the edge with a red pin to see kind of the diameters of where I'm going to have to cut this decal. Once I have my outline, I remove the tape, and I'll be using this as a guide as to where to cut the decals when I'm ready. It's finally time to lay down some paint on this car, and as usual, I'm using Rust-Oleum Sandable Primer and Krylon Color Masters Bright White. Now this was a satin paint, and I didn't realize it when I bought it, but I figured why not give it a shot, and it actually turned out really well. I was very happy with the way the paint went on there, and it turned out really smooth. Once the paint's dry, it's time to put the decals on. I went over to eBay to RWNEFF1 and picked up a few decals. I've used quite a few decals from them now, and they're always of high quality and go on really easily. If you go check out his eBay page, tell them Nero62 sent you, and they will give you 0% off of every purchase. I'm of course using microset and microsol to help lay down these decals. In my opinion, if you're going to be using water slide decals, you need to be using microset and microsol along with them. If you haven't noticed yet, I'm going with the NASCAR theme. I think this casting absolutely screams NASCAR, and I didn't think there was any better sponsor to put on an old classic Chevy than GM Goodwrench. This paint scheme is from the number 29 Kevin Harvick car from 2001 after he took over for Dale Earnhardt. None of these decals were intended to go on this casting, so just about everyone had to be modified to fit this car. This car has some pretty intense body lines, and I wasn't really sure how well the decals would adhere to the body, or even if they would, but they actually went on really well, and having the microset was a huge help. Once the decals were on the body and dried a little bit, I used a wet paper towel and pressed down on the decals to make sure they adhered to the body. The trick to this is keeping the paper towel pretty wet so you don't accidentally pull the decal off the car once you have it set on there. So why would I make a Chevelle look like a NASCAR? Well, Chevelles were actually used in NASCAR for quite a while. They started showing up at NASCAR tracks towards the mid to late 60s, and there were actually a few 1970 Chevelles that ran a few years in NASCAR. Probably the most popular, or infamous, I guess, depending on how you look at it, Chevelle to run in NASCAR is the Smoky Eunuch 1967 Chevelle that was actually banned from competing in NASCAR. Chevelles were actually really huge in NASCAR during the 70s, and Cale Yarborough and Benny Parsons both drove Chevelle Lagunas to championships during the 70s. And there is your NASCAR history lesson for the day. This is the decal that I made the template for earlier. I cut the template out, placed it on the back of the decal, and then cut along the lines, and it worked out fantastic. I was really pleased with the way it came out. Probably the most challenging part of this build was getting these decals to line up after I cut them. There's just a couple different angles in the hood, and it wasn't too easy to get them to line up, but after playing around with it for a little while, I eventually got it to go, and it lined up pretty well. Once I put the other half of the decal on, it is time to put this back together. I'm using 256 by 3/16 button head screws, which can be found on Amazon, along with the driver. Alright, it is all put back together, and it is time to see how it all turned out. Oh yeah, check that out. Holy cow, those decals turned out really, really well. Wow, I am really happy with this one. And those white-walled tires go perfect with it. I am very happy with this one. Turned out really, really well. I originally intended to add weight to this, but I am all out of tungsten, and I am all out of fishing sinkers, so I don't really have any weight to add. And after taking this thing apart, it's probably going to be kind of difficult to add weight to it, as the front grille, the rear bumper, and the interior are all connected. So there's going to be some pretty significant modifications made to add weight to this. But this thing looks so good now, I may not add anything to it. And there's no clear coat on this right now. I've been having some issues with my clear coat ruining the paint and ruining decals, so I'm going to get a couple different clear coats and run a few tests before I actually spray this one with clear, because I do not want to ruin this one. This was a really fun build, and I had a really good time working with this casting. Probably not the last time you see me working with one of these castings. I got a couple of ideas I might want to do with these. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well, and thank you for watching. Leave a comment down below with what you think, and we will see you on the next one.